Welcome to Booked, where two guys tell you about the books they're reading. I'm Livius Nedden.
And I'm Rob Olson. I just want everybody to know we've been through a little bit of hell to get here today. Technology problems, power problems.
That's right.
So acts of God are getting in the way of this recording tonight. But we're here, and hopefully we'll make it through an entire episode without, ComEd needing to step in.
I think it's fitting because the book we're reviewing tonight is The Grand Dark, which is what I was referring to your apartment as on Sunday night.
Yeah. Oh my God. So I had a power outage on Sunday. That was 7 or 8 hours. That's the second big power outage I've had, and there's been multiple besides that. And it's like I don't live in an affluent town, but I don't live in a poor town. And how come they can't get this power thing figured out?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer. I'm just happy that it wasn't me. So not only was that Sunday, that was also 20 minutes ago. Power outage for a few minutes. Yeah. So
a goddamn storm blows through. So one or two trees are waving around, and that's too much for my power lines apparently.
Yep. Because
it's been flickering.
Yeah. Rob's neighborhood got 1/8 of an inch of rain today, and Rob's power may not hang on. It sucks, buddy. It sucks bad.
So
I let the cat out of the bag. The Grand Dark. That's what we're reviewing tonight, right?
Yes, that is. So that is by Richard Kadrey. I'm going to do a quick bio, and then Livius is going to read you about 10 minutes of synopsis for this book. So here's the bio. Richard Kadrey is a writer living in San Francisco. He is the author of dozens of stories, plus 5 novels, including Metrophage and Butcher Bird. His Wired magazine cover story Carbon Copy was made into one of the worst movies of 2001. It starred Bridget Fonda. Sorry, Bridget. Kadrey created and wrote the Vertigo Comics miniseries Accelerate. I read that as Accurate instead of Accelerate.
That would have been inaccurate.
Inaccurate, yeah. Which was illustrated by the Pander brothers. He plans to do more comic work in the near future. He has written and spoke about an art, culture, and technology for Wired. Is written about, that's weird. Anyway, for Wired, the San Francisco Chronicle, Discovery Online, The Site, South by Southwest, and Wired for Sex on the G4 cable network. He is also a fetish photographer. He has no qualifications for anything he does. It's like the coolest bio I've gotten in a while.
Yeah, the thing I love most about this is that there was an adaptation of a story, a cover story, but that it was terrible, and he just leans right into it.
Yeah.
Most people would just be like, hey, a movie was made about this story, and that would be the end of it. But he knows people have seen this. I have not, so this isn't my own commentary. Apparently it's awful. So he just leans right into it. I love that.
Yeah. Kudos. For a long bio, it was at least entertaining.
This is Rob's first Richard Kadrey book. I'm a little more familiar, but I did a little bit of digging. I started reading Sandman Slim before we started this podcast, and I was like, I think I've read most of them. But then I realized that I read, I think, 6, and they are now 11 Sandman Slim books. Sandman Slim was a fun series, and not to get into it too far, but it's about a demon who's kind of gets a chance to become human again and then has to fight demons, and craziness ensues. Not that I think there's any type of creative borrowing or whatever, but I'm reminded of the Sandman Slim series a lot when I watch the Lucifer TV show. Maybe because they both take place in L.A., like a former, person from hell is living in L.A., you know what I mean? So there's some similarities, but I loved the Sandman Slim books I read. Sadly, this podcast came along and took all my motivation to read stuff outside the podcast with it. So I left off probably around 2012 or so, is my guess.
Aw, that's sad. Sorry, Richard.
Sorry, Livia. Hey, apologize to me. I'm the one who deserves the apology for that.
Well,
anyway.
He was sitting at home like, my readership has dropped off by 1. What the hell is going on?
He's been questioning himself ever since. He was like, maybe I need to write a standalone novel. Maybe that'll bring that reader back. And you know what?
What did I...
Fucking worked.
Livius, what have I done? Just tell me.
Yeah, I'm sure
And
that's
now he
exactly.
knows.
I'm sure that's exactly what Richard Kadrey's thinking. Well, here's what he was thinking when he decided to write this book. From the best-selling author of the Sandman Slim series, a lush, dark, standalone fantasy built off the insurgent tradition of China Miéville? Mayville? I don't know how we used to say that when we used to talk about that guy.
I thought it was Miéville, but that could have
yeah.
just been like one friend said it that way. I don't know.
And M. John Harrison, a subversive tale that immerses us in a world where the extremes of bleakness and beauty exist together in dangerous harmony in a city on the edge of civility and chaos. The Great War is over. The city of Lower Prozoa celebrates the peace with a decadence and carefree spirit as intense as the war's horrifying despair. But this newfound hedonism, drugs and sex and endless parties distracts from strange realities of everyday life. Intelligent automata taking jobs, genetically engineered creatures that serve as pets and beasts of war, a theater where gruesome murders happen twice a day, and a new plague that even the ceaseless euphoria can't mask. Unlike others who live strictly for fun, Largo is an addict with ambitions. A bike messenger who grew up in the slums, he knows the city's streets and its secrets intimately. His life seems set. He has a beautiful girlfriend, drugs, a chance at a promotion, and maybe an opportunity for complete transformation. A contact among the elite who will set him on the course to lift himself up out of the streets. But dreams can be a dangerous thing in a city whose mood is turning dark and inward. Others have a vision of life very different from Largo's, and they will use any methods to secure control. And behind it all, beyond the frivolity and chaos, the threat of new war always looms.
Take a breath.
Yeah. Yep, that's it. That's the end of it.
Yeah. So we always like to do a little synopsis dissection, and one of the things I'll say is that since this is I would say this is kind of a sci-fi / fantasy type setting. It's got a lot of world building that goes on, and so there's a lot of that has to be done, explained in the synopsis, and so that kind of explains why the synopsis is longer. Otherwise, I think it does a really good job.
Yeah, by and large, I think it's enough to get you involved. What I maybe later. I'm not going to go into it right now, I guess. So maybe later. I feel like our next job should be improving bios and synopses.
Sure.
And I feel like there are some elements of this story that really resonated with me that maybe should go into the synopsis, for anybody who reads a synopsis before they read a book, because it's certainly not me and not with this one again. So I get to read them all after the fact.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. But overall, I think it paints a good picture of what you're in for. Yeah, I have a couple of... I'd say that there's a thing or two that could stand to maybe be explained differently, but otherwise decent.
All right, we get things kicked off by being introduced to Largo Moorden, Moorden, who, as mentioned in the synopsis, is a bike messenger. He's got a little bit of a problem with a drug called morphia. Between that and having like the hottest girlfriend in the entire world, he's late for work. Which, to be fair, if you've got a girlfriend that hot and you have a drug addiction, that's probably a pretty, not acceptable reason for your employer, but at least the rest of us can understand it. So we're pretty quickly introduced to his world, which is spent mostly as a bike courier for a company that's really not ever named. But basically, they're bike messengers in a world where there are a lot of what was it called in the synopsis? Automata,
Right.
automatons, right? That could do this. They're kind of the last vestige of humans driving things around, and this is something that plays in the back of Largo's head often. We're introduced to his boss, Branca, who is a man who's very much about business and tries to instill discipline in his coworkers and basically doesn't take much shit. On this particular day, Largo is pulled aside by Branca and told that he is being promoted to head courier and that the person who had that job is gone and will likely not be returning. So it's kind of a great start to the book for our protagonist.
Yeah. So we get to see his little, weird career life in the beginning, and it's established that he's like, in the beginning, it's pretty obvious that he's by no means like your action hero type character. He's more of just like he's kind of content, just kind of rolling through life with a, paycheck to paycheck type job, and his drugs and his lady are more or less enough for him. And so after finding out he's got his promotion and doing some, following him around work a little bit, after that we're introduced to the other side of his life, which is his girlfriend Remy and her life as an actress at the titular theater, the Grand Dark. It's the Theater of the Grand Darkness is the full name, right?
It is, and what a great fucking name it is, too.
Yeah. Which has a little bit of a history as like a theater, but it's got a reputation for being a theater that displays like pretty controversial plays. And the interesting thing about the theater is it's all done with puppetry, but like in a kind of weird, like I imagine like what's that dude's name who's in everything, like that stop motion where you got that lame suit on with like the little tennis balls or like the little golf balls on it, like the stop motion recording. So like there's like the actors are backstage in these suits that like somehow remotely control these life-size puppets that are on the stage. And there's usually the stories are very campy horror type stuff. There's lots of sex and death and blood and dismemberment and stuff like that. So it actually sounds like a fucking great place to visit.
Penny Dreadful is what came to mind. They're like little penny dreadfuls, which is a terrific and a great part. This kind of comes into play throughout the story. This because Remy works there, and some of the plays and stuff kind of feature pretty prominently in some chapters. And I got to tell you, this is where we talk a little bit about world building. What a great setting for like interactions between characters at this weird place. Una is the owner of the Grand Dark. She runs it and she writes all the plays, and they're all just these grim, macabre tales. A lot of them taken from yellow sheets, which essentially are what tabloids are called. Now, you may have started to notice that we're using terms, yellow sheets, and some names that aren't, real common. This isn't, Joe and Betty and Mary, right? It's Remy and Largo and
Una. Yeah.
Una, yeah. So let's explain where this takes place. No fucking idea. Could very well be Earth. All the people are they're humans. But there are smidgens of things that could be like near future, like the way we're moving towards self-driving cars. Their cars are actually driven by robots. There are these things called chimeras, which are animals that are created in a lab. So, for example, there's a subset of chimeras that just eat the trash on the street, and that's how the streets get cleaned. There are chimeras that, partake in like the animal act in a carnival. There are chimeras that are pets.
Some power night vision goggles, which I thought was really cool.
Yes. But the world it's a little bit odd, and I think we're going to reserve most of this talk for spoiler talk. But I do want to get your take on this without spoiling anything. Obviously, it takes place in Lower, and I'm going to get this wrong again, Prozawa, right? But there's a higher Prozawa, and there's some other places mentioned. So none of these places are on Earth currently, if that's a fair way to say it.
There's no Prozawa that I'm aware of.
Yeah, but the names, the names very much all seem very Eastern European.
I was taking it as straight German, like instead of saying Mister, you said Herr.
Yep.
Or Mister was Frau, right?
Sure. I think that Prozawa, though, is a little bit more on the
like
Polish side. Yeah, it struck me as a lot of like German, Eastern European. Parvulesco could potentially be Romanian. I mean, that's very close to a Romanian name. So it's kind of weird in that it's not our world, but the name seems similar. And then there's some other things. So this is one I'm going to throw out there because I don't think it's spoilery at all. Morphia is a completely fictional drug that I'm aware of. You take it by putting drops under your tongue, and you get, I would imagine, a little bit of like an opiate high is how I took it, right?
Yep.
Like that kind of really relaxes you kind of feeling. So you have morphia, which is completely fictional, but they also have cocaine.
Right.
Which is definitely something rooted very much in our Earth. So I'm not sure what Kadrey was going for, but I will say that there were enough similarities like that to really kind of blur the line between complete fantasy, in that science fiction, this is another world kind of place, and grounded it with just enough things, like bicycles, to make it partially ours.
Yeah, and I mean, like, if the intent was simply just to make it sound foreign as in non-American, like the kind of collection of European or Eastern European terms and words, like the big ammunition / artillery company, the name is Schon Maschinen, and that sounded kind of like like it would be how you would translate to, like, machine company or something in another language. Yep. So, yeah, that works. Like, it feels like it's not here, but familiar enough where it could be, like an alternate time in the history of the world or something. There is a map at the beginning of the book, and I didn't try and see if it, like, kind of matches up with any, like, if it looks like Berlin or something, but yeah, I can imagine it was inspired by something. Although Germany being landlocked and it's got a bay, probably not the case.
Yeah, yeah. It's just it's a really interesting decision making on his part. Not bad, definitely not bad. Intriguing.
It works. Yeah, it works.
Iron dandies are the other thing that I probably want to mention in world building. So we're just coming off a war, as mentioned in the synopsis. But as war often does, it brings not just casualties that are dead, but casualties that are alive. So there are a lot of, I don't want to say army, because I'm not sure if that's exactly what, military people who are disfigured in various ways through weapons and whatever. And they all hang out around town wearing, like coats that are given to them by the government, and then iron masks. Which, cause an equal mix of intrigue and discomfort for other people. So they get a lot of that thank you for your service, but then people also give them a very wide berth because they're all kind of afraid of what's under the mask. And I thought that was, of all the things that he introduced in this world, I found the Iron Dandies probably could have carried a story all on their own. Very intriguing group of characters.
And it's interesting because I'm of the opinion that veterans of United States military probably could stand to be treated better, but like making them horribly disfigured and almost like cartoonish by wearing these like masks over their face and stuff made it kind of exaggerated. Like, they're not just mistreated because they're no longer useful in our war, but they're actually like kind of hideous. Like a hideous reminder of the thing that we're trying to forget about. Yeah,
I think that's accurate. But yeah, I mean, just great world building on his part, I guess, is what I was trying to kind of introduce here.
Yeah, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about elements of the world building as they come up. But like, so basically, the beginning of the book is Largo's normal life starting to get changed by this promotion. So like, when he's not working, he's going to the Grand Dark to watch these plays that his girlfriend's in, or going out partying with the large cast of actors and stuff from her acting group. But with this promotion, he used to just be a courier that went to any kind of random place, and it was an unremarkable job. But now that he's been promoted to the chief, was it chief? Courier?
Yes.
He's getting special assignments, and so he's going often to the very rich, very affluent areas to do deliveries, but also to some of the more sketchy areas to do deliveries, and it starts to become conspicuous. Like it's weird, some of the places he's going to, and as he's introduced to these new places, now it's kind of showing you the spectrum of life in this city. You've got these ultra rich people, and then you've got these these super poor, pretty dangerous areas, and the different ways that the people act. And it unveils the fact that, like, even though this city is kind of in a post-war kind of free and easy time, it's not on the surface that's how it is, but underneath, like, kind of more is going on, and there's people who don't necessarily like the way things are and are trying to change or want to change the government and stuff like that.
Yeah. And through really his kind of internal dialogue and through these deliveries, it was mentioned in synopsis that he kind of grew up in one of these kind of shitty neighborhoods, but we find out that in a lot of literature, the person that grew up like on the streets, in the mean streets of whatever town is like really tough. Largo for a long time has taken the approach of avoiding trouble versus being the tough guy that gets into it. So it's a little bit, I'm not going to say it's completely unique, but a lot of times when you get Largo's backstory, you get a guy who's badass and he's seen some shit, and, not our protagonist. He would much rather avoid these things. He goes into these places, he's kind of terrified and stuff, but as Rob mentioned, he starts to suspect there's something a little weird about the deliveries he's getting, and then how his boss is questioning him upon his return, that things aren't very normal in his new position as they were in the old one.
For sure. And so the trajectory then is basically like things progress at work, but then also there's other kind of elements that start to creep into his personal life from other sides. So there is an affliction. I guess it's called the drops, and it's basically kind of I think it's the plague that was mentioned. I think it was mentioned in the synopsis, some sort of plague, and so no one really understands what it is, but people just kind of suddenly go into these weird fits of convulsions and stuff, and it's really kind of scary, and so that starts to creep into people on the periphery of Largo's life, and that has an effect on how things happen. And then there's also just like, as the book progresses, you see more of a radical counterculture type, not counterculture, what would be the word, like an anti-government group kind of thing. Radicals on one side, and then you start to see the authoritarian side of the government with there's a secret police kind of group called the Nachtvogel. Is that how you would say that?
Yes, absolutely.
Who basically, they're the police that if the police are doing something and these Nachtvogel people show up, the police are like kind of afraid of and answer to this. It's like kind of KGB, Secret Service kind of, not Secret Service, CIA kind of people.
Yep.
And they're scary. Like if you encounter the Nachtvogel, maybe you just are never seen again. So these types of elements are starting to emerge as the story evolves.
And then, of course, our protagonist gets drawn into every single thing we just talked about, like any good book.
Yeah.
I didn't mean that to be a shot. Yeah. I just think, like, how much more can we say about this story? Like, that's, we...
And kind of finally, I think the only other thing that we could say plot-wise without starting to spoil what the story turns into is that on top of all of these things that are, like, kind of coming to Largo's attention, suddenly people are starting to just kind of disappear and come back. And there's some interesting things that happen with, like, someone, I think pretty early on in the book, someone doesn't show up for a few days, and when they come back, it's interesting to see what happens. So, like, on top of the kind of two different sides of the spectrum politically, and this plague, there's also people just vanishing. So there's a lot going on, and it's all it's cool to see how all of those different elements tie into the story of Largo and Remy and all the people that are important in his life.
Indeed. I want to credit Rob, who did a wonderful job putting together the most thorough document for this episode. And the reason I say is there is a significant cast of characters, and Rob probably listed out at least 15 of them, and then a bunch of places and things. I mean, there's some work went into this. Yeah. We have a few groups that, I'm going to cover very generically. There's Largo, and then people who he works with. So the courier group, we can call them, right? There's the artsy group, which is Remy's co-stars and playwrights and people who work there. But then, of course, they have, like, the painter friend and, like, the rich drug provider friend. Yeah. We have some people on the other side of the spectrum. Branca, who is, like I said, the boss of the couriers, but I wouldn't put him as part of the courier group, right? Like, he's kind of a different creature, in that he's the supervisor, kind of mean, holds Largo's career in his hands kind of person. And then a smattering of other folks. It's funny because I will give credit. At one point in the back of my mind, as he continues to get involved in these things, this isn't with getting, I hope this isn't getting into spoiler territory. Someone finally says to Largo, like, man, you sure have a lot of, like, friends in high places. Like, this guy starts out, like, knowing nobody, but through the course of the story, he becomes involved with so many people that, someone at least points it out. Because I was like, man, this guy went from nobody to rubbing elbows with everybody in a relatively short period of time in his life. A week? 2 weeks, yep. I mean, it didn't take very long. And all of these characters are surrounded by this really terrific dark world that I kept picturing as, like, a more populated Blade Runner, if that makes sense. Like, sure. that the way Blade Runner is filmed is how I pictured so many of these scenes in, like, the like, bluish light fog, iron dandies running around. There's a big-ass carnival that's got super weird shit going on in it. Just a wonderful world that Kadrey created for his protagonist. It's terrific.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so one of the things that I've said, I'm going to talk kind of generally now. One of the things I've said about books that do world building is that I just fucking hate it. And I didn't ever hate it in this book. He introduced me to an entire world, and the entire time I was reading it, I was fascinated and I wanted to learn more. And it wasn't just like some sort of weird history of a bunch of nonsense that makes sense to explain in the story, but it's never really going to have an impact on the story. That was not the case with this book. The world building that happened was like, I almost felt like, so I don't play a lot of video games, but there's that, like, fog of war kind of effect. Do you know what I'm talking about, Livius? Mm-hmm. Where you only see what's necessary on the board, like, or what's within your specific range. And I feel like that's kind of how world building happened here. We learned about the world that Largo lives in based on how that world was impacting him or had impacted him in a way that was relevant to the story, which I thought was a great way to build a world. There's so much new information. Like Livia said, I've got like maybe 10 different things that I listed that are places and things that don't actually exist but were important to the book, but they were introduced in a way that was never that boring, monotonous world building that I hate.
Yeah, and that's why I give him credit. I think mixing enough normal stuff in it makes it okay. Yeah. I don't, I knew in the back of my mind that this was science fiction, but I kept convincing myself it wasn't because, science fiction, right? Like that's all I have to say about it. It actually reminded me a little bit of like Corpen's work, like Nick Corpen's stuff. Where
100%,
it takes place in a place we're not familiar with and stuff, but it's normal enough that I'm not trying to figure out 15 different races of different alien creatures, and you know what I mean? Like everything was close enough to home that all I had to do is understand there's a different drug, lots of automation, creatures that are created, You know what I mean? Like it was
Yep.
very little to add to my addled little brain that I wasn't at no point would after the initial introductions I was like, well, what the fuck is a chimera or what the fuck is an iron dandy? Like it's introduced well enough that once you've got it, and you don't have to struggle to remember what type of location this is because it takes place on a different planet, that kind of shit.
Yep. And there is a little bit of history sprinkled in, a little bit in dialogue and stuff, but there's also these kind of interlude chapters where, I mean, the chapters are just numbered 1 through 24 or whatever, but then there's these interlude chapters where, and I thought this was a good touch. Did you read this digitally, Livius?
Yes, I did.
So in the paper book, I don't know if it's different in the digital copy, the interlude chapters where it was like a, like a historical document or, something like that, or something just talking about the past, showed up in a different font. Mm-hmm. So it was obvious that you were looking at something different than the ongoing story. And I thought that was a really good touch.
Don't know if it was a different font for me, but it was definitely larger writing. So again, same thing, yeah. where it stood out. I don't know if the font, I don't think you can mix fonts on an ebook. I know I can change it. You
can't.
But I don't. Yeah. So, but it was at least in larger type. So yeah. It was. And we should mention that. I'm glad you brought that up because they are interspersed throughout the book a little more at the beginning, but they're like excerpt from the history of the Great War. I'm just making that up. You know what I mean? But that gave you some insight. Or from an interview conducted by so and so with this person, and then you got a little bit more backstory. Which blended in so seamlessly into the book that I forgot all about it until you mentioned it.
Yeah, it was nice, though, because that's how you got the history of the Grand Dark. Or like Livia said, you got a little insight into, parts of the war that, were important to the story. So very well done. And like you said, those were short. So like some of the chapters ended up being like 30 pages long. So this wasn't your Patterson 2 or 3 page chapters. Like there were some longer chapters, but these little interstitials were always, maybe 4 pages max. And it was just this little slice of life to kind of give context to whatever else was going on.
Do you want to do a spoiler talk for this?
Oh my God, yeah.
All right.
There's so much I
want to
spoil.
So what that means is that Rob and I are going to take a few minutes, won't be any time for you, but we're going to go over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/booked, where we will talk about the ending of this book, probably the whole second half of the book, I'm guessing, since we didn't get very far into it, to avoid spoilers. And that's available for anybody who subscribes at the level of $1 or more per month, and you get access to the back catalog of Spoiler Talk too. So we'll be back shortly.
All right, and we're back from a very productive Spoiler Talk. This is the type of book I'd say that my opinions that were kind of nebulous and floating out there were absolutely solidified in the conversation that happened over there. I know that my wrap-up is going to heavily reference conversations that if you didn't listen to the Spoiler Talk, you're not going to understand. So that's my plug. Go to Patreon, give us $1 a month, and listen to what we said over there. As long as you're not either A, not worried about getting it spoiled, or B, you've already read the book.
So this brings up an interesting point. Just step away from the book for a moment. I really get, and this is not a sales pitch, and I'm going to show you how this is not a sales pitch for you to like go over and to Patreon. Look, if you read books, find somebody else that'll read the same fucking books as you, so you can have conversations like Rob and I have. Because you know what? It enriched the book. In some cases, Rob pointed out things to me that made me think a little differently about the book. In this case, I didn't have a lot of negative thoughts about the book, but I was like, oh, you know what? He's right. That is kind of interesting how he did that type of thing. And you know what? You just can't fucking get... I've read thousands of books on my own. And then never fucking talked about them to anybody. Or I'd be like, oh, dude, you have to read this book. It's great. It takes place in Prazawa. And it's like about this dude. And there's like crazy actors and drugs and shit. Like, you know what I mean? And then you're like, read this book. And then you don't think about it again. Or if you think about it, you're stuck in your own head. So... whatever. If you're a Patreon contributor or not, if you are, you should totally check out what we're talking about. If not, at least find someone you can share your thoughts on a book with. Start your own podcast.
Yeah.
Or not. Don't do that. I don't know. Maybe you should do that.
So Livius can hate you.
Yeah, exactly. I need more enemies. So you should do that. Anyway, Rob, are you ready to do your wrap-up?
Yes.
All right, let's do it.
This is my first, and this is one of those, I hate it when I have to say this is the first time I'm reading something from an author who is like so established and well known and has a body of work that is admired and spoken of and stuff like that. But that's the case with this. This is my first time reading Richard Kadrey. Richard, I know you're listening. Apologies. I was at a different place before this podcast, and I'm thankful now that I get to read. I got to read this book. A lot of the conversation in spoiler talk really calcified my thoughts on the book. But going into it, I'm not a big fan of like fantasy sci-fi type of stuff because of the world building element. Absolutely not a problem with this book. He built the world in a way that was tight and efficient and never like this grand mythology. I got what I needed to understand what was going on in the story. So like, if this is world building for Kadrey, I'll read anything that he writes. So that's my first thought. Going beyond that, one of the things that we talked about in spoiler talk that I think is one of the things I'm most enthusiastic about this book for is that he incorporates a subversion of expectations at a character level, but also kind of on like a plot or narrative level that is fucking brilliant. Like, he does stuff that you would never expect a writer to do, based on the fact that like any sane editor or writer would tell you like, oh, you can't do this because it takes away from the story. And he did these types of things in a way that did not take away from the story, but it made it a fresh, different approach to telling a story that I thought was just fantastic. And so like he won billions of points with me for that. Now, going away from kind of these grand concepts that I have, it's just an entertaining book. It's got cool elements to it. It's got kind of a darker, not noir, but like gritty, darker kind of feel to it. It's got some sexiness going on with like the theater and the things that are happening there. And fun, kind of like Livia said, Blade Runner type feel to this world. And it all just worked. It all worked. I liked the characters. I liked the story. And I liked all the other things I already said. And I don't really have an objection to this book. I can't think of something where I was like, oh man, I wish this didn't happen like that. So Kadrey just knocked it out of the park for me, and it's absolutely 5 stars.
I refuse to discuss this book as science fiction. So longtime listeners of the podcast will know I have no love for science fiction. I recognize where someone might confuse it for science fiction, but this book is far too good for that. I'm gonna try not to just echo things that Rob said. I loved so many of these characters and the potential that they had. Over in Spoiler Talk, Rob and I probably loosely outlined 3 other books that come out of this world, right? So, and I'm not kidding. Like, there is so much more that you can tell with the foundation that Kadrey has built. The characters were tremendous. Even the ones that you weren't supposed to like, you were interested in. There's like we didn't mention. There's I don't know what's the word. I'm like a subversive musician woman that appears in this book. She takes up like a whopping 3 pages, all told. And regardless of how important she is to the story or not, she's got a backstory in this world that's worth hearing. Like that's. Like every aspect of this book feels that way. So Richard, in the event that you are listening and you want me to outline some other things for you, I'm happy to do it. Just hit us up and I'll tell you how to write your next 3 novels that take place in Lower Prozawa, whatever. We've given up on trying to say it. So the world building was terrific. The characters were terrific. I started off Spoiler Talk by explaining to Rob how I had it all figured out at the 50% mark. And then I had to explain to him how I was wrong. And that was good, too. There were some things that I expected to see that I didn't see. There were things I didn't expect to happen that happened. And it made for a very pleasant experience. Because at one point, literally halfway into the book, I was like, got this whole thing figured out. Now I just got to barrel through another, 200 pages to get to the end so I can prove myself right. And that was not the case. So that was also very pleasant. Look, I really liked the first however many Sandman Slim novels I read. I'm probably too far removed from it to go back and read them, but I can tell you that I'm probably going to read whatever independent stuff Kadrey does going forward. I'm also going to give it 5 stars.
Boom. Hell yeah. Richard, if you're listening, bookedpodcast@gmail.com to set up that interview that I know you're dying to do.
Yeah, if you want to tell us more, we have questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about this with the author. Like, it's just such an interesting thing.
It would have to be the first spoiler talk interview, because I want to know about these naming. Like, I would never ask, you know what I mean, like publicly, but be like, come on, man, what's this all about with all these names, and what's this place, and where's it supposed to take place? And you know, I am. He'll be like, well, I don't know, and I'll be like, you're a liar. You know exactly what it is. So who knows? Anyway, I'm glad that you opted for a Kadrey book. Just tremendous. I'm glad that I was able to bring you over to the dark side on another writer. I think
the Grand Dark Side.
Yeah, even the name, the Grand Dark, is terrific.
Yeah, dude.
And yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm all right. I'm done. I'm done gushing over this book. Everybody should go out and buy a copy. This thing's only been out for like a week, I think, 2 weeks, whatever.
Yep.
Rob, what else do we have?
I mean, we kind of addressed that we have a full docket.
Oh my God, Jesus! Yeah.
But I just want to kind of illustrate what the hell is going on, because for the first time in booked history, we kind of have our shit together about like, or the planets are just aligning in a way that they usually don't. So I'm bringing up a spreadsheet. So just strap in, because it's always the most exciting.
I'm also trying to find the spreadsheet, and I'm reminded that Rob at some point is going to be like, "Can we review the novelizations for Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day 2?"
My God. So yeah, all right, we're gonna take a little side tour. I'm fucking going around to all the half price books in like the northern Illinois area, and so the first time I went to the one in Algonquin this past weekend, as my power went out, my power went out when I was out shopping for books, and I drove through this hellish storm where like trees are falling in the road, and it was crazy. But I was already in my car driving when that storm hit, so it's not like I'm just like, well, I don't care if there's a storm, I'm going to buy books. Anyway, I get to this place, and it's just got tons of books. Like, I don't know, I didn't show you, Livius, but I picked up like 7 books there. And I actually, with a massive amount of restraint, there was a First American hardcover and a First American paperback version of Raw Shark texts that I did not buy.
How dare you?
Even though I don't have the paperback first edition. So I did exercise a lot of restraint. One of the books that I found that like is insanity, and I can't even there's no reason I bought it, but I just couldn't not buy it. There was a paperback book that was a novelization of the movies Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day 2, and I was like, what does this mean? Is it one story and they just like mix it all together? No, it's 2 books in one.
How so? I know that a lot of movies get novelized, right? They don't have to be good movies, they don't whatever. I happen to really like the first Happy Death Day, and I thought the second one was okay. I know that's kind of how you felt about them too,
right?
How the fuck did somebody think to novelize that at all? But not just that, they're like, we're going to novelize both of them in one fucking book. Like, how?
Well, here's the interesting thing about that. I don't have it close enough in hand. It's on my bookshelf. It was novelized, I believe, by the movie production company.
That's so fucking weird, man.
So, I think it's Blumhouse. So...
it's weird because we've talked about this about novelizations and are they important, should they exist anymore previously, and I've got to say, even as I'll say overall a fan of that series, I don't know if they're going any farther with it, that didn't fucking need to be novelized. As a matter of fact, I think that story is dependent on visuals.
Yeah, I fully agree.
So starting the day over again in writing seems like a terrible way to fucking do something.
It sounds pretty tedious.
Yeah, so.
But I couldn't resist buying it. I just couldn't resist. One thing I did pick up, you'll be happy about, Livius, was a paperback copy of the Lansdale book Dead Man's Road that we reviewed a fucking lifetime ago.
Oh my God. You said that and I was like, that sounds, I think I've heard of that, but I probably heard about it on this podcast.
Probably did. So yeah, Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day 2.
How many half price books have you been to?
Like 5 or 6 now.
Jesus.
Yeah.
I didn't go to any half price books this past week, so I don't know. Have we ever decided, is it cool for me to just take all my ARC copies there, or do I have to like fucking donate them to Goodwill? Do we ever decide what the right thing to do was about that?
Yeah, I think that, well, the thing that I hit upon was donating to library book sales.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's supporting a local library. It's not supporting like Goodwill or Salvation Army or something that's like, I mean, which are good causes, but, well, Salvation Army hates the gays, so we don't want to talk about them. But I just think a library book sale is like, it seems like, because the whole focus of a library is reading. So for me, and by the way, the wall is like 2 books away from being complete. Wall of books.
Rob's building the wall. Listen, I want to talk about this, and you may want to take this out or whatever, but I still want to get a booked, like, take a book, leave a book thing going.
How is that going to work?
Well, they have them everywhere, right?
Oh, so, like the little, like...
Yeah, where you know, and you know what? Just imagine how excited someone might be when we put one of these arcs that comes in. That's something that we would never, ever look at. It's akin to like when the guy saw me reading the Mallerman book in McDonald's and asked how I got a copy of that. But imagine like someone surprised when they walk up and there's the new insert romance writer's name here, because I can't remember any of them, you know. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Something I think that would be cool to do. Something that's branded with art. Not that I think like people would, you know, come to the podcast or whatever. I just think it'd be really cool. Maybe we just need to reach out and see if we know anybody that can help us build one of those. Like, paint it, our logo, stuff.
No, it'll be like the movie Tragedy Girls, where the bitchy. Did you see the movie?
No.
No, the bitchy girl that nobody likes makes a one of those lending library type of little
that would be me.
Houses. Mm-hmm. But that's her way of getting getting qualified for some award or something, and so it's all self-serving. Anyway, you want to talk about upcoming books?
So a few anomalies. We have, I don't know, 10 more books planned out for this year already, which is insane because that's never happened. But we are smack dab in the middle of reviewing 4 books in a row. And that's probably only happened like 3 times in the 8-year history of this podcast.
Yeah, and the tricky thing is, like, some important books just released. So its release date for today is that we're recording, July 2nd, is the release date for our next book, Paul Tremblay's Growing Things and Other Stories. So we're getting to that in as timely a way as we can. But the 9th, actually, I think Chuck Wendig's The Wanderers released today, even though like I have the 9th listed as the release date, but also John F.D. Taft's The Fearing released on July 9th. And so our month of July is already taken up, and the Wendig book is almost 800 pages, so we're not going to be able to get to stuff as they release necessarily, but like within a couple of weeks. And it's just because, goddamn, we've been doing a lot of reading, and there's a lot of stuff piling up. So I think after Tremblay, we might have to do an interlude just to give us time to get through Wendig.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So
I also want to say that this is an impressive lineup. I'm really excited about some of these things. So I'll throw out just a few. Rob mentioned a few. We have a new John Bassoff book, The Warehouse by Rob Hart. We're going to do another Joe Hill book. John Horner Jacobs, which is a name that we haven't really talked about on this podcast in a number of years. And potentially...
Before you move on from that, Jacob's book actually releases on my birthday.
Oh, well, there you go. See if you can get him to send you a couple copies for your birthday.
Yeah.
An Aaron Morgenstern book.
I'm going to be devastated if this book doesn't work for me, because I've been waiting for this book for like 6 years.
I know. And it's still like, look, we love a lot of books that we review, but very few does like both of us have like an emotional attachment to the Night Circus.
Yeah.
So even after all these years, I'm also kind of excited about a new Mark Danielewski book, except for the fact they sent fucking Rob a copy that I'll have to borrow because they didn't send me a fucking copy. So I'm a little negative, -1 star there, Danielewski. Just FYI.
Shit. Hey, you don't even send out the emails. I sent out emails for both of us asking for that book, so you have nothing to complain about. I will say the nice thing about that, key page update, we're close to I think 7,000 pages already for the year for what we've reviewed. And that includes Livius reviewing the Mister. So our own personal page counts are going to be off for the rest of the year. Personally, I'm coming up on, I think, 7,500 pages, and it's halfway through the year.
Yes, and when I look at some of these are going to be beastly books too. He mentioned Wendig's The Wanderers, right? 800 pages. I can't imagine The Warehouse is going to come in under 400 pages. Joe Hill doesn't write short books.
Right.
Morgenstern,
some fatties.
I don't think Morgenstern writes short books. Now, I have to ask, because, you have this information and I don't. Is The Little Blue Kite a straight up kid's book? Is it 150 words on a bunch of colored pages?
It's exactly what it is.
All
it's
right.
96 pages total. Although, here's the cool thing. I'll do a little... I'm going to get the book. You can hear my chair.
This asshole. Oh, let me touch the book that you're so jealous about not having.
Let me get this book. It's in my hands now. I'm touching it. 93 pages of text. And some pages have 4 or 5 lines. Some have 3 words. In the beginning, though, Livius, this is what's interesting. It says the only other thing you might want to know about this book is that there are at least 3 ways to read it. The first takes only a few minutes. Just follow the rainbow. In fact, if you have a little extra time, you can read it right now. The second takes only a little bit longer. Just follow the words haloed with blue and red, and the rainbow words too. For the third way, just start at the beginning. So there's 3 separate ways it recommends reading this book.
Shit. All right, I am going to go because I have to send an email from my own personal email account to see if I can get a copy of that. But I'm excited. We have a lot, and that still allows for just a couple more books, because we also have the Halloween Spectacular. We have the Holiday Office Party coming up. We still are waiting on one Patreon selection for a book we're going to review. We already have one has been submitted from our 2 eligible Patreons, where we will review a book of their choice with them if they so choose.
Yep.
So I don't know that we're going to cram a lot more books into this. What I will say here on this podcast is that we are going to do our damnedest before the end of the year to bring you an interview with Mark Danielewski.
Our damnedest.
Our damnedest. Rob's damnedest. Probably.
I'm going to do a little flexing to see if we can get Kadrey, just because I want to keep talking about that book, too.
I am down for that. And we did mention I'll say we're in discussion with Matthew McBride to have him on, too. So I'll be honest, the way our schedule is looking, that might mean some bonus episodes where you get just an interview episode dropped amongst a ton of books that we're going to review. So that's all I've got. I think that's enough. I think we're going to do a lazy 2020 of podcasting after this book filled. This is the year that we've been waiting for, though. We had such shame over 2016 and 17 and how little we read. This is a revitalization, I believe, and I'm very excited about how much I'm reading. It makes me happy. So far, so good. Next week, Paul Tremblay, Growing Things and Other Stories. And I'm saying this publicly so we can stick to it, one of the only 2 short story collections we'll be reviewing this year.
All right. I'm thanking the heavens that the power stayed on for this entire episode. That's going to wrap it up. Join us next week for that. Join us the rest of the year for just a ton of awesome stuff. And until next time, I'm Rob Olson.
And I'm Livius Nedden. Keep reading.